Well, good afternoon, folks. I'm Daniel Kelly, and I'm a regular co-host and guest on the podcast When Belief Dies. But I've been thinking about making a few videos around philosophy of religion, meta-ethics, and things like Pascal's wager for a while now. But I'm really bad at video editing. So I've previously given a written response to Answers in Genesis? No. Answers and Reasons, 10 questions for atheists. But obviously I know they wanted video responses, and so I could practice some video editing skills. I'm going to give you those 10 responses now.
Question 1. With there being a number of different types of non-theist or atheist, what label do you use for yourself, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I would describe myself as an atheist, but it's kind of a complicated answer to quite a simple question. So to break that down, I think that theism has two central claims rather than just one. So there is the belief that there is a God, and this is this metaphysical, deity-based metaphysics claim that it has. But if it just holds to that, then I would class that as deism. So I consider theism to have on top of that this God is the basis of at least one of our theologies. So we have an understanding of what this God desires, what this God thinks, and this gives us additional knowledge or additional access to moral considerations in our lives. So that's how I understand theism. So when I say I'm an atheist, I'm kind of attacking it on both levels. So one, I hold loosely to naturalism, which I would naturally preclude the existence of any gods. So I do kind of take on that claim, but I take it on quite weakly and fallibly. You know, metaphysics is hard. We are not certain about these things. It's more a case of comparing the theories and seeing which one holds out. But I don't think that is necessarily the definition of atheism, because I think it's perfectly acceptable even to say, well, even if a deity-based metaphysics is true, no theology that has ever been presented seems to have good epistemic qualities. It doesn't seem to give us access to additional facts about the world that are reliable. It doesn't seem to improve our moral considerations at all. And I think it's perfectly rational to not actually take an active stance on the deity-based metaphysics questions while still taking a very strong stance against theology. And I think that is a perfectly legitimate understanding of the term atheist. So, in other words, I kind of do actually respect those who hold to the lack theist definition, while obviously being a naturalist myself. I think that's a slightly different framework, and perfectly happy to just frame how I use these terms to whoever I'm having a conversation with, whatever works most reasonably for the conversation. But that's how I broadly understand the terms in sort of the technical definitions. But also, you know, obviously it has a personal aspect. You know, my Christian faith was an important part of me for such a long time, and I'll chat about that in a bit. But to now say, well, actually I have made a deliberate decision to live outside of religious community. And I am critical of my former beliefs. I'm critical of many of the beliefs that can exist within religious communities. So when I call myself an atheist, then I often use the term critical atheist. I'm not just communicating just a philosophical proposition that I hold to. I am communicating, yeah, we can have a conversation about religion, but yeah, make a cup of tea first. This could take a while, and you may not come out unscathed.
Question 2. Have you ever believed in a god? Which religion did you ascribe to, if any?
Yep, so I was a Christian for, I think, the first 29 years of my life. Sort of grew up in quite a Pentecostal, charismatic style church. I then spent a bit of time in Eastern Orthodoxy, which is a bit different, and eventually sort of came around to a more reformed understanding. So kind of a Calvinist, also still had a bit of that Orthodox influence in me. I think my main project as a Christian was to try and hold to the Christianity that I understood to exist at the beginnings of the church, and hold to that sort of timeless Christianity. A bit of a failed project in the end, but that was the idea.
Question 3. Were you brought up in a religious area or with a religious family? How did those people around you react to you coming out as an atheist?
When I left faith and came out as an atheist, I had a whole host of different responses. It was really mixed. On the bright side, when I told my parents, they were 100% clear that they loved me, and that was not conditional on me being a Christian. And if anything, my relationship with them was strengthened by that journey. Others were not so good. I've had people who have either implied or just explicitly, made statements that makes it clear that they think that because I'm an atheist, I am of a morally deficient character. I received so many apologetics books, sort of trying to convince me on questions that were entirely assumed, and very, very few people were actually willing to have a serious conversation about things. My atheism was a threat to many people. I equally found it incredibly difficult. I hadn't just left Christianity because I thought it was false and just dismissed it. It was around some of the things that I felt ethically I could no longer hold to. And so I was equally angry as well. And when this was, 95% of my social circles, I found it incredibly difficult. I found it probably the most isolating experience of my entire life. So, yeah, it was a difficult time, and there are a few people who responded well, but the majority didn't, unfortunately.
Question 4. What arguments or other evidence do you find most convincing against the existence of gods or various religions?
So I think, it's cliche, but obviously I think arguments from evil are incredibly effective, and particularly ones that argue from sort of evolutionary evil or evil in design. So, if we're saying that God is omnipotent, then surely everything that has happened over the course of all of history is under his power. And so therefore, if we do see, horrendous evils such as, flesh-eating parasites, the anglerfish, the extinction of the dinosaurs, the classic example of a fawn burning alone in the forest and suffering a long and torturous death, then either we have to say, well, there's no God, or he's not omnipotent, or these things actually happened because he values them. And that might bring into question, actually, what sort of character can we say that this God is? So I think that's like a really compelling argument in getting people to really engage with some of these questions, and I think is an important starting point. But I think equally probably the one that most convinces me is non-physical minds. So if we understand naturalism to be true, which I think, it's the most likely, it's the best of our current theories, then that would preclude anything that is non-physical from having a mind, because the material explains the mind. I think that for me is probably one of the most crucial, but I would still go further to say, well, actually, if we have access, if we have relationship, if we have some sort of communication of whatever form with an omniscient being, then we would expect that information to be incredibly reliable. And usually I don't see that in particular theologies that there's this correct sort of scoping out of what are the boundaries of that God's communication, that God's revealing of knowledge, of certain moral opinions, etc., that then shows to be reliable, sustainable and successful. And I think that's also a major argument.
Question 5. What arguments or other evidence do you find most convincing, interesting or thought-provoking for the existence of a deity?
I think what theistic arguments get really well is that our understanding of the universe is incomplete. And, thinking about stuff like Paley's watchmaker argument, the world intuitively does feel like it's designed, and it's so so delicate and so complex, and yet everything sort of works together is just remarkable. And I think, it's really exciting to actually learn about evolution, to understand, here's how that apparent design can come about through naturalist processes, which is just remarkable and entirely unintuitive. And I think similarly, where probably, the conversation's at now is that conversation's just got bigger with cosmology and the fine-tuning of the universe. And the universe appears to be fine-tuned. How did we get that? And obviously, I don't think we have coherent answers to that yet. Equally, what I would say is that's still only pointing out a gap in the alternative. I don't think actually I know of many good arguments that really push forward a positive claim for theism. Usually it's just sort of, hey, there's something missing over here. And I think having people point out where the naturalist account fails is still a good thing. I think that actually strengthens our understanding of the universe rather than just going along with our assumptions. So still good reason to look into theist arguments.
Question 6. What behaviours do you see from your fellow atheists or non-theists that you'd most like to change?
Well, there's quite a few. I think one of the biggest and one of the most offensive is just connecting religious belief with mental illness. It's completely false and an entirely unhelpful aspect to the conversation. But I think the biggest one, I would say, is the way that we just talk about the term religion. Religion is a really murky, complex area, and I would see religion as being really tightly tied into culture. And I think that then makes it more difficult to work through. So when we just reduce religion down to the sets of beliefs that someone has about supernatural beings, and just declare it as false, we can fall into a bit of a trap. And I think we need to appreciate that, religion is as much about, if not even more, about art, music, ritual, communities, people, than it is about supernatural beings. And we as atheists can strip out these claims to divinity while still keeping intact the very rightful claims that people have that says, this is human, this is part of who we are. And I think that's really important just from, a political perspective. We can look at, the history of the empire and the impact that Christianity had in sort of spreading throughout the world and in all these different communities, saying, well, you have these wrong beliefs around the metaphysical nature of reality and the nature of your relationship to God, and so therefore you are culturally and morally deficient. And I think that's had an immense damage throughout history. And I see so often that similar pattern being expressed by atheists, to say, well, you believe in a God, you have this wrong metaphysics, and you therefore you are culturally and morally deficient. And I think we need to be really careful about that and find ways to be more precise in what we're saying is false and what we're saying is unhelpful, so that we can still allow and engage and sometimes even take part in aspects of religion, its rituals, its art, its music. I think there's so many great things there that we can still take part in while still being very strong in our claim that there's nothing divine here.
Question 7. Religion brings people together as a community. It offers support, various rituals that bring family together to help deal with death and all that sort of thing. But what does your local atheist community do to support folks in this regard? If either you have no local atheist community or your local community doesn't do anything, what sort of things would you like to see from an atheist community in this regard?
In terms of atheist community. I mean, I've not found like a explicitly atheist community in my local area or to engage with. I found community around other things, and it's really only in the sort of online space in particular that I sort of engage with these sort of conversations. But yeah, the idea of like a death ritual is really interesting, and because I think it is one of those things which it needs something to give it some sense, to give it some structure, to help people sort of process all those emotions and feel like they know what's going to happen next at such a uncertain and heartbreaking time. I don't know what I want necessarily from my community in that, but obviously, I have thought, what could I make my funeral like? Because I'm aware that, the vast majority of people who would be attending right now will probably still be Christian. And obviously their theological beliefs about what's happened to me are pretty dreadful. And I don't know how to support them in that. And I don't know what to do about, should I plan my own funeral? Should I give them something that might comfort them? Or do I just leave it and let them decide how they're going to cope? I don't know.
Question 8. Do you think moral statements like it is wrong to torture a small child for fun express truth? If yes, what do you think makes it true? For example, is it the society, the people, or is it true regardless of what people believe? If no, what do you think it actually expresses? Is it emotions or intuitions, or are you giving people instructions?
Yeah, so I think this question actually excites me a little bit more than philosophy of religion, this entire area of metaethics. So do I think there are moral facts? My answer is no. And I think a lot of philosophers do actually hold to moral realism, and I'm going to respect the professional philosophers far more than my layman attempts. But equally, I do think some of that could quite possibly be from, the Christian legacy that still survives in Western philosophy and Western thought, that, moral facts exist. I don't think, though, that we actually understand what people do on the ground. And a lot of this thinking about morality doesn't actually really build itself on sort of good empirical evidence of what people are actually doing when they're making these sort of claims out in the wild, and how people think about these things when they're negotiating in day-to-day circumstances. So, against a philosopher, I might describe myself as more error theorist, but in general, probably describe myself as a moral chaos theorist, in that I think there's a lot of stuff going on here, and a single meta-ethical view that's going to comprehensively capture all these different conversations that happen between humans, I don't think is within our realm. So what I prefer is to try to avoid moral language myself. I utilize a system more often than not called nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I think it's more pragmatic and more useful, and I think rather than positing these external facts, actually it brings more of the ownership to us. So I think that we as humans just have needs. We need food, we need water, shelter, sex, all these other things. And living in a social society and being built as social creatures, we have to negotiate for these things, and we do have empathy with the needs of others as well, and it's this complex web. And so rather than moral facts as these things that we discover innate within our existence in the universe, instead they're things that we invent, that we create. They are the negotiations, the laws that we create for one another to help predict one another's behavior and establish things that are going to help us all reach our common needs.
Number 9. If there was one theistic religion you had to choose to be true, what would it be and why? And no cop-outs saying they're spaghetti monster or anything like that.
I would probably say Sikhism. So, I mean, for very little reason beyond, every engagement that I've had with people from that community has just been joyous. I think, yeah, in both my experience of those people, but also my understanding of their theological commitments in terms of, their Sikh traditions are one to help them connect with God, but also as clear indicators to others of support and community. So in particular, my understanding is that the turban used to be sort of this aristocratic or sort of royal headdress, and the Sikhs took that on as one of their symbols for everyone to wear who committed their life to the Sikh way. And one of the key reasons why they wear the turban is as a sign of, if you are someone who needs help, ask me, and I'd be willing to help. And that's one of the commitment, to help those in need. And they wear these physical symbols to help themselves stand out, to make that support available, while at the same time they believe that there are multiple paths to God. So it's not an exclusive religion. It's not saying this is the way and the only way to God. Rather, it's this is a way. This is how we express it. But we fully appreciate that there's going to be so many other journeys that people can take. And I think that's such a major difference in terms of, part of the problems that I have with many other monotheistic religions like Christianity, like Islam, is that it's our way or the highway, basically. That exclusion that they create, and therefore the judgment on people's cultural, moral deficiency in being outside of their religious beliefs that Sikhism just doesn't have. So if I ever got convinced that theism, in terms of the metaphysical arguments, were true, and I committed, you would see me as a Sikh, not as a Christian again.
Question 10. Do you enjoy any theistic content? If so, which channels would you recommend to your fellow atheists and non-theists? If not, are there any theistic channels that you've seen that do present some good arguments, even if you don't agree with it?
I think one philosopher that I really enjoy engaging with is the work of Dr. Liz Jackson. So she looks at stuff like Pascal's wager and sort of decision making when it comes to belief. She does a lot of work on how do we understand faith and hope, what do these terms actually mean, and sort of taking quite a philosophical approach to these questions. I disagree with her positions a lot, but I actually enjoy some of the ways that she's tackling these sort of, what is the epistemology of faith? And that is an area which I think is incredibly interesting, and I want to do some more work on myself, and sort of how we might even be able to make an atheistic wager against theism. I really enjoy pulling on her stuff for that, and it sort of gets out of some of the more classic arguments, except for Pascal's wager. She does major on that one quite a lot. Well, that was my response to 10 questions for atheists and non-theists from the guys at Answers and Reason. A great channel. I've really enjoyed these questions, and I've enjoyed watching their channel for a while now. So please do give them a follow. And obviously I could have talked about any one of these topics for quite a while. So if you do want to hear any more from me, you can find me on the YouTube channel and podcast When Belief Dies, with my friend Sam Devis. We're both former Christians. We chat about leaving faith and the intellectual and the emotional aspects of leaving faith and atheism, agnosticism, that sort of thing. We've also interviewed some amazing Bible scholars like Bart Ehrman and Dale Allison, as well as some really interesting philosophers like Simon Blackburn and A.C. Grayling, which has just been fantastic. And who knows if I'm actually able to crack this video editing, video making business, and eventually put together perhaps a more interesting background. I'm also thinking about making some content around the moral argument, Pascal's wager and sort of religious epistemology, but want to build on my own knowledge and some video editing skills as well, because this has taken me forever and I'm so tired. But anywho, thanks for your time, and I'll see you all later.